I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. The point is that when we say God is a moral monster, he's evil, and therefore we should not believe in him or he doesn't exist. The problem with that is when we talk about good and evil, we are actually establishing a standard. And God is a very good solution to that standard. And if you take the standard out of the equation, then you no longer can have this discussion anymore, right? So to claim that something is evil and then remove the definition of good undermines your argument. So you can no longer even have that argument. So when we say what is evil, taking God out of the picture is actually not a solution. So today we will deep dive into why that is the case. The key question here is when we are faced with challenging passages depicting God, how do we deal with it? So I will again re-emphasize the framework that we've been using since the first session. So remember, number one, we talk about our mindset, the Prince William picture. If you just want to look for the middle finger, you don't bite it. Okay? But if we really want to find the truth, then we should come at it with a discovery mindset. Let's discover. Ask ourselves the question, what if I'm wrong? Okay? Are we willing to change our minds if we made it wrong? Number two, when we do interpretation, there are passages that are clear. So we always interpret from the clear to the unclear. Okay? So for example, when we talk about better God oppresses women, many passages clearly are laid out to protect women. Women are seen with equal rights. They get the same punishment, they get the same protection. And in Genesis, clearly, women, men, both made in the image of God. Equal value, equal rights, right? What is unclear is, why is it that when the mother gives birth to a girl, the period of uncleanness is longer than when giving birth to a boy? Right? We talked about that. So there are specific passages like that that seems a bit weird, but not very clear as to why that's the case. Okay, so that's what I mean by we have the clear and unclear passages. We need to prioritize them and interpret them accordingly. When we talk about the problem of slavery, clearly there are a lot of laws that are written to, again, say that the rights of the slaves are there. You can't abuse them for whatever reason. They are protected. But what's unclear is, why didn't God just wipe out slavery? Right? Why does it still remain? So there are clear aspects of the Old Testament and not so clear aspects of the Old Testament. And then when we talk about genocide, what is clear is that the Canaanites were in existence all the way. They never got completely wiped out. Right? You read the Old Testament, they were always there. What's unclear is why then are the destruction languages being used in the Old Testament? Let's completely wipe out the Canaanites, right? So that one is not so clear. Of course, we talked about the context of how literature was written at that time, and based on certain circumstances, we have good reason to believe that it's not used literally. I know we have some discussion about differing views, which is also okay. So that's what I mean by go from clear to unclear. Okay? Now, the last one that we talk about is this, we always go from the big picture, the macro, to the micro. When we're trying to understand someone's character, we don't interpret the character based on the single event. Right? We judge a person's character based on a big picture, a series of experiences and events. A single event doesn't tell you everything about the person, right? So very often we didn't just look at that single verse or passage. We looked at the overall context of the Old Testament. overall context of the ancient Near Eastern culture. And here and there, we also bring in how it looks like when you bring in the New Testament. Okay, so this is the framework. Today, I'm going to close the loop a bit because when we interpret things correctly like that, all we are saying is that the Bible is coherent. When we say God is good, God is loving, and we have legitimate ways to understand the Old Testament passages, we are saying that the passages are coherent with God's character of love, of justice, etc. But just because it's coherent doesn't mean that it's true. Okay? So today we will get our hands a bit dirty on how to get to this. Essentially, how do we establish truth? Of course, coherence is one evaluator. Truth cannot be contradictory. You cannot contradict yourself, right? Otherwise, it's not true. So coherence is an important aspect, but also we have evidence and reason. It must be backed up like this. So today we will look at some of the philosophical reasons why God makes a lot better sense when we talk about good and evil. And then the last aspect is reality and experience. If something is true, it must match up with reality and how we experience life. Okay? So if someone has a certain view of how they define morality, the next question you need to ask is, can you live out that morality? Often you find that people may have a view about morality theoretically, but in actual live experience, they actually don't live by those principles, right? So these are signs that is untrue. Okay, so today's agenda, 2 parts. We will spend a bit more time on the first part. Question of the divine foundation of goodness. Can man be good without God? Okay. Then we'll talk about why we need a foundation for goodness. And we'll explore one of the alternative explanations for morality, which is naturalistic evolution. Can that explain morality? Okay. And the conclusion will be that, yes, you need a divine foundation for goodness. So part 1 is a philosophical reason and support for why the Christian narrative is true. Okay? Often you link to this also, okay? Whether it can be lived down. And then we talk about Jesus as the fulfiller of the Old Testament. We also talk a bit about what benefits historically did the Jews bring to the world? What benefits did the Christians bring to the world? And then I'll just wrap up by how Jesus is the climax of expression of God's character. Now, when we talk about the historical things, the good things that Jews and Christians brought to the world, actually we're talking about reality, right? You say your God is so good, his teachings are so good. Where's the proof, right? So in actual reality, do Christians, did the Jews actually bring society forward? Did it even help mankind, or was it more harmful, right? So these are aspects, if they all line up, we'll argue that it's more likely to be true. Okay, good so far? Good? Okay. The divine foundation of goodness. First, let me start with the opposing views. The Christian is saying that you need God to define good. The skeptics are saying, Christopher Hitchens throws down the gauntlet, says, I defy you or anyone to name one more deed I will not do unless I became a Christian. Basically, what he's saying is, doesn't matter whether I'm a Christian or not, I would still continue to do good things. And even if I become a Christian, I will not do anything more or less, right? I'm already good. Yeah. Stan Harris, he writes of the myth of secular moral chaos. That is, morality and social order don't need God or religion as their basis. After all, there are plenty of moral atheists and many immoral religious devotees. He rejects the notion that rape or killing children is wrong just because God says so. Again, we don't need God. We know what is right from wrong. It's basic human instinct, right? God is irrelevant. Then you have Daniel Dennett. He challenges the notion that goodness is opposed to scientific materialism. There's no reason at all why a disbelief in the immateriality or immortality of the soul should make a person less caring, less moral, less committed to the well-being of everybody on earth than somebody who believes in the spirit. He adds that a good scientific materialist can be just as concerned about whether there's sanctity of justice, love, joy, beauty, political freedom, and yes, even religious freedom, as the deeply spiritual. Indeed, those calling themselves spiritual can be cruel, arrogant, self-centered, and utterly unconcerned about the moral problems of the world. Him as a materialist, he believes all there is nature, material, argues that there's no need for God. Okay, plenty of good deities around, plenty of bad believers around. Richard Dawkins insists that kindness, generosity, and goodness can be found in human nature, and that Darwinism explains this, right? So Dawkins goes one step further. He doesn't just say that we don't need God. He says that we actually have a way to explain morality and goodness, and that's found in Darwinism, i.e., evolution, or more specifically, macroevolution. We have altruistic genes who are genetically wired to scratch another's back. In other words, genes create morality. God or religion doesn't. We humans have a moral conscience and a mutual empathy that are constantly evolving. Okay?